Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again from Film Fanatic headquarters. It is Sunday at 11:49. Hope everyone's doing good. Pretty cold November day. So, yeah, I played last night. I played a benefit show. It was actually a fundraiser for WERU, which is a locally owned radio station that's been in existence for so many years. So there was a fundraiser for that yesterday at Hey Sailor, which is such an awesome venue. I got to fill in my friend's band, Sam Wydick, his band, Very Greasy was the was kind of the featured band, and that I was filling in for him on drums. So it was fun. I love playing at Hey Sailor. I got been really fortunate to play there a lot, and in a few more weeks I have one more gig there that I know of that's on the books with. We have a Quantum show coming up, and really excited about that show. I'm going to do some heavy promotion coming up. Travis Lloyd is going to be playing. He is a really talented guy. I've known him for a long time. He's had so many different bands, and he is now doing kind of electronic based music. Really cool stuff. So stay tuned for that. There'll be a bunch of promotion. That's going to be coming up in December. So yeah, we had a good time last night. I thought the show went pretty well. We only had like one rehearsal, and then I tried working on the tunes on my own as much as I could. But I thought for what it was pretty fun. And I have filled in for Very Greasy a handful of times. I've played with them probably about maybe 3 or 4 times now. Filling in, and that's one of the cool things about the local music scene or the local area that we live in is a lot of talented bands. Very Greasy is like probably my favorite cover band. They do some really unique covers, and the other cool thing is a lot of bands are able to kind of have subs. Meaning that you can get if somebody can't make it, a guitar player, drummer, what have you, you can hopefully rely on a little circle of people that can fill in and do shows, which is pretty valuable thing these days for gigs because that is a problem sometimes with bands. Obviously when the full lineup, not everybody in the band can do it. If it's a 3 piece or 4 piece or bigger, the circumstances of like, well, this guy can't do the show, but everybody else can, then you can't do the gig at all. It's kind of a bummer. So it's nice to be able to have that resource of where you can like still do the show and still like get your name out there and all those kinds of things. So yeah, and lately I've been taking a deep dive and doing a bunch of shows on all the movies, and I I had done some shows on his some of his films in the past, but then I realized because it's one of those things I'm always kind of brainstorming and thinking of ideas as far as what I can do for this channel. And one of the things that I thought of to kind of make it, I don't know, to for at least for me, maybe a little bit more focused is, picking a director that I really love and just kind of going through their list of films that they've made through the decades and checking them off. Movies that I have seen and that I've never talked about. So I've been kind of doing that. Obviously, there's going to be movies and certain directors, you know, um, catalog, especially directors who've been around for a very long time, where certain films I haven't seen, but for the most part, it's I have seen most of those kinds of films or most of those films as opposed to not seeing a lot of them. So there's a lot to talk about. So lately, I've been taking a deep dive and exploring the amazing work of one of my favorite directors of all time. That is David Cronenberg. And it's been a lot of fun going through his movies again. I've been a huge fan of his work for years and years and years. My first film that I ever saw of his was The Fly with Jeff Goldblum and Gina Davis. That was the first Cronenberg movie I'd ever seen. What a way to start! arguably his best movie. I mean, his most commercial film, I guess, and probably his most financially successful film. But again, diving in deep to his catalog, so many great films, and I've been spanning the decades really from like the late '70s, early '80s to even to uh, 2025. You know, recently he had just put out that film, The Shrouds, and that was a review I did a few weeks ago. So it's incredible the kind of the longevity that he's had as a director and the amount of work. I mean, spanning the decades. And when you think of kind of the big picture of that, of all the different kinds of films he's done, all the amazing actors, like it's pretty amazing. And he's always, it's always been known too that he's always kind of worked with the same crew. He's had the same crew um, to make his films for years. Dating back to the early '80s. Like it's wild from The Brood to like Shivers to The Shrouds. Like he's had anytime I've seen interviews, like special features with about a Cronenberg film, and there's a segment where they interview some of the people who work on his film. You know, there's always this really cool sense of like loyalty to him as a director and as a person. It's pretty awesome, and it really shows and in his work. And I think that's one of the reasons he's had this like really amazing sustainability throughout the years. And while there was a long gap for on the more recent times of where he didn't make any films, but for the most part, super consistent and always pumping out new and exciting movies. And he's always, he's mostly well known for doing, well, body horror films, films that blend science fiction, elements of horror, and copious amounts of gore. So, but I've been, again, revisiting a lot of his films. I have seen all of his work. So some films I hadn't seen in a while, but enough to where I remember what they were like. Some I've seen fairly recently again. But one of the things that I think sometimes gets overlooked with Cronenberg is that there's been many times where he's kind of stepped out of the label that he gets, as far as being a science fiction horror, body horror driven director. He really has branched out into other styles, even dramas, you know, movies, and he always deals with a heavy kind of psychological element, especially around his characters. And a lot of his films are kind of character studies, but they're also about kind of the psyche, how man interprets um, philosophies, in regards to like obsession, mortality, sexual sexual experiences, and existential experiences. So he always has like I've always felt with Cronenberg, he always has this kind of deep psychological thing attached to his films. So his films always have this kind of gravitas to them, or this certain kind of gravity to them. Like I remember when I first saw The Fly, I remember seeing that film as a kid, and even again, I just watched it recently, and I've seen that movie so many times I can't count. I couldn't count how many times I've actually seen it. That movie, legitimately scared the shit out of me as a kid, and it still is so unsettling. But the kind of the psychological element of it, I always like. I mean, not only is it just, I mean, really, it's just an amazing kick, just such a kick ass sci fi horror film, but it's so kind of a sad, very depressing film in a lot of ways. That's one thing I get because I always find I really have the sympathy towards and empathy towards the story, Jeff Goldblum's character, and when I see him go through, all of this pain, and that he knows he's, about, he realizes what's going to happen to him, and his sense of like, his mortality. It's always like that film. It's always kind of gut wrenching, even though it's such an amazing, just entertaining film, and a perfect blending of science fiction and horror, but it's got a lot of weight. And that's one thing I see a lot in a lot of his films, really most of his films. So today's show is going to be on one of his movies. He's had a long kind of collaboration with Viggo Mortensen, who, again, an iconic actor, probably most well known for his work in the Lord of the Rings films, but just an amazing actor. I think he's been around for many years. He's got so many abilities. I think he's a chameleon. I think he can literally play any role that is given to him. He's just got this charisma and an incredible ability as an actor. I've always been a huge fan of his work. But he started a pretty long partnership with Cronenberg. And it kind of started, I believe, with History of Violence, which I covered. I did a video of that film. That's up on the page. Eastern Promises, which is today's show, I believe was his second collaboration with Cronenberg. Again, another completely, definitely a departure, stylistically, a very different film. His other film that he did, which I think is in this order, Dangerous Method, which is a really very different film yet again. That was the third collaboration, and then the most recent film that Viggo Mortensen, where he collaborated with Cronenberg, was Crimes of the Future, which came out a few years back, 2022. So I believe Viggo Mortensen and Cronenberg, like I think as far as actors go, he's worked with him more than any other actor. And again, I don't own all of his Cronenberg's films. I don't own all of his films on Blu-ray. I definitely need to get an upgrade because again, he's one of my favorite directors. He's always been one of my favorite directors. But the only movies that I have on Blu-ray are Dead Zone, the Stephen King adaptation, which is an amazing film with Christopher Walken. I also have Shivers, which is such a gonzo crazy film, one of his earliest films. Huge fan of that movie. And then on DVD, I have Dangerous Method, History of Violence, and Eastern Promises, Scanners, Videodrome. I think that's all I have. But there's definitely more, obviously, way more movies to cover, to buy, and I definitely need to get an upgrade for on his films. I don't. Oh, and The Fly. Can't forget The Fly. I have a couple of versions of that on DVD, but I do not have it on Blu-ray, which is kind of absurd that I don't have that. Eastern Promises, which is today's show, is a really, really good movie. It's a super gritty kind of gangster movie. Similar in tone to a degree to A History of Violence. Amazing cast in this film. Viggo Mortensen, of course, Naomi Watts, and Vincent Cassel, who was actually just in The Shrouds. He's the star of that film, and he's in one or two other of his films. But Eastern Promises is a really awesome movie. It's brutal as all hell. It came out in 2007 already, which is wild. It's a kind of a full on kind of gangster film, and it's a movie that I feel is never really talked about enough. I think it's one of his, even though it came out in 2007, I consider it to be one of his later films. I think it's one of his best films. I never hear this movie really discussed enough. I have a really good copy of it on DVD, but again, I think I definitely need to get an upgrade because it's such an awesome movie. It's brutal as hell. I mean, it's probably one of his more violent films. But again, it's such a different style. I mean, again, I think it's somewhat related to history of violence because it does deal with kind of organized crime. But the tone of it, the where the film goes is very different. Naomi Watts, who is in this film, is such a great actress. The first film I had ever seen her in before was the first movie I ever saw her in was Mulholland Drive by David Lynch. Mulholland Drive is a masterpiece, and since then, I've followed her career for a long time, and she's been in some amazing films, and I think this is a very great and fantastic role that she plays in this movie. And I never really hear this movie talked about enough. History of Violence gets a pretty good amount of buzz around it still. But I do think it deserves to be talked about more. It's such a fantastic movie. Cronenberg is known for his violence in his movies, well, body horror. And this movie has this. There's one scene in this movie, like the bath, where the characters are in this bathhouse, and it's brutal as all hell. It's one of the most violent scenes, I think in one of his films that has ever been made. Just fantastic. And again, Viggo Mortensen plays a completely different actor. I think he really reinvents himself. I mean, when you think of, History of Violence and Eastern Promises kind of came out very close in time. First, History of Violence came out first, and then Eastern Promises, and it was kind of the start of them working together. You cannot recognize him at all in this film. Viggo Mortensen, like he really, not only is he just has this fantastic presence, but you really see his talent as an actor. He plays such a unique character, completely unrecognizable. And I've always thought, like I said at the beginning of the show, Vigo I've always felt is such a versatile actor. He could do anything. I don't know if I've ever seen him do a like comedy, but I've seen him in horror films. I've seen him in action dramas, period pieces, you name it. So, just a fantastic movie. A movie that I feel is again not talked about enough, and it was the second film of where these great artists both got to work together. But a fantastic film. I definitely would love to get this upgraded on Blu-ray. The DVD I have of this film is actually pretty good. I think I got, again, because I have History of Violence, I have Scanners, Videodrome, Eastern Promises, The Fly. I think I bought all of those. They're all on DVD, and I think I got them. I've had some of them for a very, very long time. Like The Fly, I bought quite a few years ago somewhere. I got it really cheap. Um, and then History of Violence, and then Scanners, and Eastern Promises, which is today's show. I got at I think I got them at a sale, a video sale at Opera House Video, maybe a year or two ago. Can't really remember. Opera House Video does this really cool thing. They only do it twice a year or so. Sometimes they do it a little bit more often. They had one. I think the last time they did it was in the early part of the summer. And basically, what they do is Opera House Video is the only video rental place in the entire state, which is just wild. They have so many movies. I mean, it's insane that there's so many movies that they have that they can't put them all out. So they have this huge kind of inventory of all of these movies that they're kind of sitting on because the house itself is, totally filled. So they do these big sales, and they continually get movies brought into them. A lot of people just donate movies and what have you. So they have these like street sales or like an open house sale where they'll sell a bunch of DVDs and Blu-rays, and it's awesome. I've gotten so many great movies through that. I always try to keep my eyes peeled as to when they have these sales. And they've had about probably three or four of them, and I think there was only one I missed. And they're marked down. They're really, really cheap, and I think that's probably where I got these Cronenberg DVDs. But again, pretty good quality for Eastern Promises. It's a pretty good, like, I guess, higher end DVD. Definitely worth keeping. I've watched Eastern Promises quite a few times. Not as much as The Fly, but I have seen it quite a few times. But nevertheless, awesome movie. I highly recommend it. Any of these movies that I've talked about so far, with maybe the exception of The Shrouds, which is his latest film, I highly, highly recommend to check out and to definitely see. If you're into physical media, definitely get them on Blu-ray. That's something I will eventually do because Cronenberg is such an aesthetically driven director, and he really has this unique style. It's one of the things I love about him is he can do films that are in so many ways such a departure for what he's known for. Like with Eastern Promises, where it's a kind of this gangster film and it's a drama. But I can tell right away that it's still a Cronenberg film. It's still got that kind of grittiness to it. He does a really great balance of some of his stuff is, very high concept, especially in the sci-fi realm. But he does this really great thing of where he keeps everything really grounded, and even though sometimes his stories, the story itself, it goes completely batshit crazy and is totally bonkers. But there's always this thing of where there's a sense of like the characters or the story is really grounded, where you have this tangibility to the story, to the characters, and Eastern Promises is very much that. Like it's very much grounded in kind of reality. There isn't any supernatural elements. There are no like fantasy elements. But even in the case of where he has that, like with The Fly, for instance, perfect example. It's very grounded and very realistic, even though it's obviously very fantastical. So amazing, and I feel like that's a really tricky thing for a director to do or for a writer to do because, that can go in a direction of where it can get so fantastical and outrageous that, you have to suspend your disbelief going into a movie because you want that experience to be entertaining, but you still have to have some kind of grounded logic as to like how something can happen or why a situation moved to where it's become something different. So he's like a master of doing that, even when it comes to his more outrageously crazy films like say Scanners or Videodrome, there's still this sense of being grounded. But Eastern Promises is a very grounded film, the whole thing. So very different than what he's known for, but you can totally tell instantly within 5 minutes that you're watching a Cronenberg film. So thanks again, and we will see you next time. Peace.